Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 1209 of the Juicebox Podcast. On today's show, I'll have two guests. Sean Saint, who is the CEO of Bionics. They make the iLet pump, and Paul Edick. Now, Paul, he's from Xeris Pharmaceuticals. They make Glucagon. Today, we're going to hear about how Xeris and Bionics are going to team up to help make a bi-hormonal pump. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. When you place your first order for AG1 with my link, you'll get 5 free travel packs and a free year's supply of vitamin D. Drink ag1.com/juicebox. If you or a loved one has type 1 diabetes and you're U.S. residents, please go to t1dexchange.org/juicebox and complete the survey. When you complete the survey, you are supporting type 1 diabetes research, and you can do that right from your house. t1dexchange.org/juicebox. Complete the survey. You're helping yourself, you're helping other people with type 1, and you're helping me. This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Eversense. The Eversense CGM is more convenient, requiring only one sensor every 6 months. It offers more flexibility with its easy on, easy off smart transmitter and allows you to take a break when needed. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. US Med is sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast, and we've been getting our diabetes supplies from US Med for years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. Use the link or the number, get your free benefits check, and get started today with US Med.
Hi, Paul Edick. I'm the CEO of Xeris Biopharma.
Paul, welcome back. You've been here before. I took a look this morning. You're back in the 300s in my recordings, and I'm about to post episode 1200.
It's been a while.
About 4 years. It's nice to have you back. And Sean?
Sean Saint, CEO of Bionics.
Okay, now, we've never done this before. This is very interesting. So we have Bionics and Xeris. Why would the two of you be together on one podcast? Let's find out. Who wants to go first?
Maybe I'll take it if that's all right with Paul. You know, Bionics has been, we've had a vision of bi-hormonal glucose control now for over 20 years since Ed Damiano, our founder, started thinking about exactly that. And, you know, over the years, there have been several things that have held us up. You know, Ed's blown through a lot of roadblocks here, but at the end of the day, we needed hardware. We have that. We needed an algorithm. We have that. And we needed an appropriate glucagon. And enter Xeris, because they've certainly solved that problem.
So, Paul, if I remember correctly, 4 years ago, we did an interview together. And at that time, you were just talking about Gvoke as a rescue glucagon. And I tried to prompt you. I tried to get you to say something about, hey, you think this will ever end up in a dual hormone pump? And you wouldn't really say back then. But have you guys been working on that since then, or even longer?
The answer is no. I talked to Ed years ago, and we kind of talked back and forth. Bionics ended up with a relationship with Zealand for a while, and we've stayed in touch. And when Sean took over, you know, we reinitiated conversations. And the net result is we said, look, we believe we can formulate an appropriate glucagon for pumps. And we've maintained that dialogue, and you know, we finally put it all together. And our aim is to be the facilitating glucagon in a bi-hormonal system.
Wow. Sean, what were the needs? What did you need the glucagon to be able to do?
Well, the primary need is shelf stable, right? There's been limited shelf stable versions of glucagon over the years. The early development of both our program, our bi-hormonal program, as well as a few others, have primarily utilized the lyophilized glucagon, which starts to degrade immediately. You reconstitute it with water, and you know, we've historically used it for up to 24 hours, but it's not really a product. In order to be a product, we're going to have stability that goes well beyond 24 hours. And again, that's, I think, the primary challenge that we were looking for. There are others, compatibility with the materials that we're using, et cetera. That's always got to be a concern. But the shelf stability of the solution is the main one, I think. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's what we do. I mean, we believe that, just like Gvoke, we can build a unique formulation that will be shelf stable and enable the dual hormonal system.
What's the amount of time you need it for? Is it just I wouldn't imagine you design it just to work for the length of the set, right? But that's really how long you need it to be good.
Yeah, that's what you need. I mean, from my perspective, I would say mimicking an insulin experience is probably a very good goal. Insulin's fine to be stored in the fridge, right? But you do bring some with you. I have some in my backpack right here that I can carry around me for a period of time. So I always have some with me. And to me, that's sort of, so I'm not going to put an exact number on it, but that to me is the experience that you're looking for.
Okay. I'm going to jump around here for a second because in the direction of the questions that pop into my head. But, rescue glucagon for people who don't have good insurance can be expensive. So I'm assuming you're going to want this covered by insurance, and you feel like insurance will cover it because you're going to be throwing a lot of glucagon away. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's necessary, especially if we're being honest, when we're talking about high-end automated, and closed loop glucose control, we're talking about insulin, we're talking about a pump, we're talking about now a glucagon associated with that. And it's probably not realistic for most people without insurance, unfortunately. And we'd all like to solve that problem, and we'll work toward it. Certainly, we make our products as affordable as we possibly can in terms of out-of-pocket copays, et cetera. But yeah, that would be a true statement. We'll definitely need to work with insurance to make sure it's good. But in order to do that, you want to show a clinical benefit, right? And I don't think we've ever been more convinced that we can do that with a product like this. And the early formative trials that we've done with glucagon and the bi-hormonal system indicate exactly that.
Okay, that's amazing. It's very interesting. We put this conversation together kind of last minute today, but I earlier in the day put a poll up on my private Facebook group after I saw your press release about what happened today. And I just said, would you want a dual hormone pump? I didn't know we were saying bi-hormonal, or I would have changed it to that. And yes or no, I have 367 responses so far. It's been up for 4 hours. Yes, 272, no, 10. And the third answer, which was, is at 87. So people came in and asked a lot of different questions while we were in there. And after we talked for a minute, if you don't mind, I'd like to swing back and maybe ask you some of their questions.
Sure.
But overwhelmingly, I think this is a desired thing. Like I had a private conversation with somebody this morning where I said, I think this is the first step in the next chapter of algorithm pumps. Your press release today, that's what that made me think.
We completely agree.
Yeah. Now, the person I spoke to disagreed. And I said, I think there's a desire. I think there's a safety and a security component to it. And I think a lot of people are going to run to this idea and enjoy it. So let's talk a little bit about how it actually works. You've done some trials, it sounds like, in-house. What's the functionality of the device? How does it actually work? Diabetes comes with a lot of things to remember. So it's nice when someone takes something off of your plate. US Med has done that for us. When it's time for Ardent supplies to be refreshed, we get an email. Rolls up and in your inbox says, "Hi Ardent, this is your friendly reorder email from US Med." You open up the email, it's a big button that says, "Click here to reorder," and you're done. Finally, somebody taking away a responsibility instead of adding one. US Med has done that for us. An email arrives, we click on a link, and the next thing you know, your products are at the front door. That simple. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. I never have to wonder if Ardent has enough supplies. I click on one link, I open up a box, I put the stuff in the drawer, and we're done. US Med carries everything from insulin pumps and diabetes testing supplies to the latest CGMs like the Libre 3 and the Dexcom G7. They accept Medicare nationwide, over 800 private insurers, and all you have to do to get started is call 888-721-1514 or go to my link, usmed.com/juicebox. Using that number or my link helps to support the production of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Eversense CGM. Boasting a 6-month sensor, the Eversense CGM offers you these key advantages: distinct on-body vibe alerts when high or low, a consistent and exceptional accuracy over a 6-month period, and you only need 2 sensors per year. No longer will you have to carry your CGM supplies with you. You won't have to be concerned about your adhesive not lasting, accidentally knocking off a sensor, or wasting a sensor when you have to replace your transmitter. That's right, there's no more weekly or bi-weekly hassles of sensor changes, not with the Eversense CGM. It's implantable, and it's accurate. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox. The Eversense CGM is the first and only long-term CGM. Eversense sits comfortably right under the skin in your upper arm, and it lasts way longer than any other CGM sensor. Never again will you have to worry about your sensor falling off before the end of its life. So if you want an incredibly accurate CGM that can't get knocked off and won't fall off, you're looking for the Eversense CGM. EversenseCGM.com/juicebox.
Well, insulin and glucagon act like the gas and brakes in your car, right? One brings your blood sugar down, one brings it back up again. And it's just that. Number one, we can help to minimize hypoglycemia with the addition of the glucagon. We can potentially be a little more aggressive on the hyper side because we can then catch you on the lower side. And really, it's mimicking the physiology of the human body, right? If you don't have type 1, you have both insulin and counter-regulatory or glucagon response. We're simply replacing that with the system, which is why it works better, or hopefully better. Mm-hmm. If possible, Scott, I'd love to quickly address what I believe is one of the reasons why not everybody agrees with this. And interestingly, your poll showed an overwhelming majority wanted it, but did you tell them what their control was going to be like? No, because we can't know that, right? So why did they say that? They said that because they could see that the main point of it was eliminating hypoglycemia, which means reducing the burden of living with type 1 diabetes. Yes, we expect this system to give you better blood sugar control. But in my mind, more importantly, we expect it to continue to remove the burden of living with type 1. I agree with you. It's a next generation system. We believe the iLet is by removing the burden of insulin dosing. This is then the next generation, removing the burden of thinking about your blood sugar at all. We hope.
Do you feel like you can move the target on the iLet down because of the addition of the glucagon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Basically, you're going to be bumping and nudging blood sugars around. If the number's not important, but if the algorithm feels like we're going to get low, you're getting like a microdose almost of glucagon, I imagine, based on whatever the number is. So you're not using a lot of it. Is there in your testing, or even Paul, like what you know of it, like, you'll hear from a lot of people, I've had to use glucagon and I didn't feel well afterwards. Or like, is that not going to be an issue when you're just using small micro amounts of it?
Yeah. So the rescue glucagon, Gvoke, and this utilization of a new form of glucagon, very different things.
Okay.
At the end of the day, the whole situation with rescue is you've got a problem. You're beyond gummy bears and you're beyond juice boxes, and you're going to end up in the hospital. And you get a fairly substantive dose of glucagon, which will bring your glucose back up in 10 to 12 minutes. From 25 or 30 up to 65 or 70. That's absolutely necessary in a life-saving situation. What Sean is talking about, and I think rescue has a future, but I also think there's an opportunity to introduce a better way for glycemic control. And the glucagon component in a microdose or mini dose fashion in combination with mini doses of insulin is about control. And the odds are, if Beta Bionics gets it right, you'll have less rescue necessary. But keep in mind, there's only 1 million out of 15 million people that carry a Gvoke or a rescue device. Mm-hmm. Not everyone will have a pump. So, there will be a future for both, but they can live together. But the goal, I think, is glycemic control at the end of the day, so you have less rescue.
So, Paul, you didn't just take Gvoke and repackage it or reconstitute it somehow for this. Is it a different molecule, or how much can you say about that?
Yeah, it's a different formulation of glucagon with different compatibility characteristics relative to the components of the pump and versus the pen, different profile relative to shelf stability and length of shelf stability, et cetera. So we formulated something that would go into a cartridge and sit for a period of time, or we're in the process of formulating, and will be adequate and appropriate for that mini dosing in a pump. To be clear, it is a different formulation.
Different formulation. So this might be a little bit of a diabetes geeky question here, but Paul, are you going to have to put it through the FDA, or is Sean going to have to? How does that work?
Yeah, because in today's day and age, the FDA they have increased requirements than they used to, right? We don't tend to get like a drug without a delivery mechanism. So in our case, Xeris's and Beta's case, the bi-hormonal pump with the Xeris Glucagon will be tested together as a system. So we'll take the lead on that, but we're obviously going to be working together on all portions of it.
It's interesting. Paul, you're not covered by this being similar to the drug that you've already gotten through the FDA?
No, will have its own phase 2, phase 3 program that Beta Bionics is going to have to go through to show safety and efficacy of the product in this system.
Okay. Sean, how long do you think that's going to take?
We're probably a little early to make predictions on that yet, Scott, but we're going to work as hard as we can at it. That's for sure.
Okay. What is the next step then? There's a good question.
Well, the next step is getting the formulation right, and we think we're well into that. We'll deliver that this year, no question. Then it's a matter of Beta going into phase 2 and getting an agreement with the FDA on a phase 2 and phase 3 program.
I see. Gotcha. So this year, to get the glucagon together, Sean's going to be putting stuff in place as best he can without it. And then he's got phase 2 to go through and phase 3 to go to. So then you come out the other side. We talking like 2 years or more?
Well, it's not months. I'll tell you that.
Okay.
We can all agree that it's, this is clinical development. It'll take a couple of years.
Right. Now, Sean, in the meantime, are you guys turning knobs on your algorithm in the back room?
Well, absolutely. But I don't think that we necessarily need to. I think continuous improvement is always something that a company like ours wants to be thinking about. So, of course, algorithm is a core competency for us, which means we think about it every day. But the algorithm that we've tested in humans with our bi-hormonal system up to this point has performed in a way that we're very happy with. So even if we make no improvements, that's fine.
Are you willing to say what way that is?
Meaning, how does it?
I'm
behave?
asking about a range. Is there a range that it's able to hold on to?
I apologize. I can't quote this directly off the top of my head, and of course, Ed Damiano certainly could. But I believe we've gotten about an average. This is published data. About an average A1C of about 6.5, with something like 92% landing below 7. Time in range gets up into the mid 80s, kind of thing, with effectively very little interaction with the product, right, and no worry of hypo. So yeah, we're pretty happy with that. But I think the important point, as I mentioned earlier, is not so much about our time in range or even our A1C. It's about the burden required to get to that phenomenal control. And that's where I think the answer to your questions earlier really shined, because they didn't even know what control they were going to be getting with it.
Paul, I have to ask you, when you're considering doing something like this, it can't be lost on you that you might be putting yourself out of business with a new business, right? You know what I mean? Like if everybody's one day going to wear a pump where they're like, I never get below 60, like, or so infrequently, I'm not scared of needing rescue glucagon. Do you think of this as a possible shift in the future?
Actually, I don't see it that way. We don't see it as putting rescue out of business. There will be a part of the population that will do very well on this. Not everybody's going to have a pump. I think there'll be a good ecosystem for both glucagon in a pump and a rescue device. Mm-hmm. In fact, somebody who's got the system, if they don't there's still a human element to that system. And if you don't do it perfectly, things can go bump in the night. So I would say, regardless of what pump you're on, what you're doing, if you get it right, cool. You might go that for 5 or 10 years, getting it just perfectly. But there's going to be that one time, why not have a Gvo candy just in case? For the population at large that doesn't have a pump or this particular pump, it's absolutely there. It's kind of like, why wouldn't you have it?
Right.
It makes sense.
Listen, my daughter doesn't leave the house without Gvo EpiPen. So if this is a question you can't answer, I wouldn't be surprised. But Sean, what if another pump company walks up and taps on Paul's shoulder and says, hey, we want some of that too? Can he do that, or does your agreement not allow for that?
Look, our intent is, I liked your question earlier about for Paul and sort of disrupting yourself. And I think I'll first say that, look, my history. I'm very much a pen guy. I believe in the technology strongly. There's a lot where we can do with pens. I think 93% of people, give or take, are still using pens instead of pumps across insulin delivery. So Paul's right. There is always going to be a market for rescue. But associated with that, similar question is, might somebody one day scoop us? It's possible. And I think we see the development of this formulation of glucagon is to some extent an enabling technology for that industry. If somebody figures out a way to do it, we're trying to do better than us, well, that's great. Then that technology will be there. Luckily, we'll be in a position to capture some of the economics of that, as will Paul or Xeris. Paul, what do you add to that?
Yeah, Scott, we contemplated that. New technology begets new technology, right? So there's bound to be other systems and other algorithms and other pumps. And this agreement enables Beta and Xeris to both participate, whoever comes up with a pump or a better algorithm, or even if Beta Bionics comes up with a different system. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to get an enabling glucagon into the market.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think this is fantastic. Paul, if you may remember, it was a long time ago, but the appearance of Xeris, that's the first thing I thought about. When I saw like shelf stable like this, that's what I was like, oh my God, they're going to get this into a pump. Like, because I knew people who were in some of those old studies long time ago, probably before Ed's algorithm had anything to do with Beta Bionics, if I'm remembering all this correctly. And they were probably just using like the old Lilly stuff and just seeing how it worked. Is that right, Sean?
It's correct.
Yeah. And you were not you weren't with them then, but they saw the people. Let me make sure I'm not even saying this as a question. It's a statement. The people I spoke to who were in that study were very impressed by what was happening to them.
I'm actually going to use the word we got, and I'll explain that. I was really quite phenomenal on that. I mean, people use the phrase, forgot I had diabetes, which I think is probably the most impactful phrase that as a person with diabetes, I can think of when you think about an experience with a new technology. I said we because oddly, I've actually been involved in this project since way back then. I went up and introduced myself to Ed at ADA, I think 2011, and offered to help. And we ended up having a partnership with him in tandem. I was at Tandem at the time. That really helped to enable the ambulatory work that we did in 2000, and I believe it was 12 and then 13 with the Beacon Hill trial. So I'm feel pretty close to this project for over a decade now. And to be able to meaningfully push it forward with this is just a bit of a dream.
It's amazing that it takes that much time. And yet it's not really that much time. You know what I'm saying? Like in one person's lifetime, it feels like a chunk, but the consideration of all that goes into it and all that has to be learned and discovered and proven over and over again, it's not that long, really. It's actually pretty exciting. Do you guys have anything I'm missing, or can I go to questions?
Go to questions.
Okay. They want to know if the glucagon would be pre-filled.
I think most likely yes. There is a real concern of the agency today, and it's well-founded, that drug confusion, of course, is an issue. And I think the absolute worst thing that you could do is accidentally put your insulin in your glucagon side and your glucagon in your insulin side. Disastrous consequences on that one. So
yeah, okay. A lot of people just think it's great. I think this is great. There are days when I can't imagine swallowing another tablet or drinking another juice. See the look on my daughter's face once in a while. She's just like, I got to do this? And so I'm like, yes, you do. This person just says, hey, listen, CGM technology, am I okay here? Like, we're going to be letting this thing make a lot of decisions. And that's a person who clearly doesn't use an algorithm now. I answer people all the time and I say, look, my daughter's been using an algorithm forever. It is honestly never an issue. But some people don't have as good of experience with CGM. So what if we get a false low? Are we going to start suddenly getting a bunch of glucagon? That's a concern, right?
Well, I mean, the simple fact is, first of all, CGM technology is phenomenal these days. I mean, we've had some form of automated insulin delivery, I suppose, since 530G in 2000 and whatever that was, but 12-ish. It's done nothing but get better since then. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are occasional errors, and yes, they will lead to slight versions of over underdosing. But I think the beauty here is that if you get a false low, you're right, it will lead to some level of glucagon dosing, but that's better than the alternative, which is, some level of insulin dosing, which is where we live today. Mm-hmm. So I see this as not as an incremental risk in any way, but an incremental benefit over the current technologies. And because we're microdosing, we limit the negative impacts of the larger boluses, which are required at times, as Paul said. But I think that's the goal we're trying to do here, is to make those lifts more gentle.
Okay. Let's say you saw a false 60 and it gave you a microdose of glucagon, and then the CGM found itself again and realized you were 110. Is your algorithm going to think, can it compensate for the glucagon with its next bolus?
I don't know is the short answer. The longer answer is all the closed-loop technologies are built to understand that CGM is not perfect point to point. It wanders all over the place, just not all over the place, within a narrow band to some extent. Mm-hmm. And our algorithms are designed to be tolerant of that. So yeah, if you end up with a little microdose of glucagon, you end up with a couple of points higher than you'd like to be, then we'll get you back a couple of points lower over time. And Paul's got something.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to add to that. We get that question all the time. Am I going to have too much glucagon, and is my glucose going to go too high? The answer is no. It tends to not keep driving once you're at a certain level. I mean, the hormone almost self-regulates a little bit. The other thing too about CGMs, the technology has gotten a great deal better, but there's data out there these days that people still run low for like an hour out of every day with some CGM. So it's a fine line. I think every new technology, including the both hormones in a pump, is going to advance the state of affairs. There will still be outliers. There will still be, situations, but there's this myth that too much glucagon is going to get my glucose is going to skyrocket. It's just not the case.
Okay. This might be a good place for one or both of you to put into context for people how glucagon really works. Like, so this thing you have in HypoPen, for example, when you inject it, I believe that there's maybe a false understanding of how it works in the public, right? Like, they think that the liquid in the pen is directly the thing that raises your blood sugar, but it really is signaling to your liver. Am I right? And can you guys go through that process so that they understand, Paul?
You're right. It's not the actual glucose. It's glucagon stimulates the production of glucose in the system. It's not straight glucose at the end of the day.
Right.
And
so there is an amount that you could use that would stop being effective, right? But you don't imagine that with the system you'd get to a tolerance like that, I imagine.
No, that would be, even the rescue doses are, it doesn't, I think in our clinical program, all the people in the program, and don't quote me, I don't have it right in front of me, I think people got up as high as 160, 170, but, no higher than that. On average, I think it was even a little bit lower than that. Mm-hmm. And that's a full milligram of glucagon. In the system that Sean's talking about, people are going to get a fraction of that.
Okay. Now, Sean, will you have to put in your literature that it might not work if you've been drinking? Or what will the impact be of that? Because doesn't drinking mess with it gives the liver something else to do, so releasing glucose with glucagon is not as effective. Is that correct?
In terms of the physiology, I'll let Paul handle that. In terms of the labeling, frankly, we don't know. That's the whole reason that we go through these trials and these discussions with the agency is to figure those things out to make the most responsible and well-labeled products that we can. So that'll be determined. Paul, can you comment on the drinking bit?
Yeah, so I don't know that there's a specific contraindication or warning about drinking. I'd have to look back at the label. Obviously, in a clinical study, we didn't have anybody who was drinking heavily, so right. I wouldn't know. But I don't think you're going to have a situation where glucagon doesn't work. It works. You may not have the adequate dosage, and then the algorithm would adjust for that.
Okay.
For rescue, in any situation, I think you've got plenty of glucagon.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So I'm not a physiologist here, but I think Paul's got to be right on this one. And the reason is that we are mimicking the body's counter-regulatory response, right? And in a person without diabetes, when you tend to get low, your body releases glucagon, which acts on the liver. We're just providing that, separately. And the short answer is people who are drinking are not getting hypoglycemia all the time or to a dangerous level. So the regulatory system works.
I don't know if it's a colloquial thing, but I've just heard over and over again that, be careful, your rescue glucagon might not be as impactful if you're drunk. And so I wasn't sure if that was something you'd be like trying to look into or not. But, I'm sure you're going to have to look into everything if you want to get it through the FDA. So
I have no doubt. I will be interested if one of the arms of the clinical trial is the alcoholic or what have you, but we'll see how we have to do that.
I don't think you're going to have any trouble getting 21-year-old people to get into your study if you're like, we're going to need you to have a little buzz while you're in there. That might be the first study that's easy to pack with people.
Yeah.
Well, another good reason to also have Gvoke on hand, no matter what pump you've got.
No, you're making a good point.
Very true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you said you guys kind of got back together again. How long was this in the process before we got to today's announcement? And Sean, how much good work did Paul have to show you before you were like, yeah, let's do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that Xeris has been, so we've known of Xeris, and to Paul's point, companies have known each other for quite a while. I mean, I would say probably over 10 years at this point. But as Paul was saying, I'll let him answer, but they went one direction, and that's great. I don't know when they conceived of this new formulation. We've been working together on it for months now. But what I will say is that when they came to us with the formulation, it was quite impressive. It was tailor-made for what we needed and just turned our head immediately. So yeah, ton of work.
I will give Sean some of the kudos here. At one point, the two of us just got on the phone and said, look, it looks like we've got something that'll work here, and let's get this together. I think it took us 2 months?
Yeah, tops.
Once we just got on the phone together and said, look, we think we got the technologies. Look, and we put a deal together.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you both a question that doesn't have to do with this, and I'm going to ask it to Sean first because I think it's a more fair question to Sean. I want to give Paul an extra second to think about it. What's the most difficult thing, Sean, about getting iLet into people's hands? Like, what's the speed bump you have to get over? Like, we know that, I mean, I don't know how much people realize this, but of the, almost 2 million Americans that have type 1 diabetes, not many of them wear pumps. Like statistically, like that, we already know that's difficult. We also know people generally don't walk around with rescue glucagon in their pocket. So you guys make these products that do this thing, and you have this great feeling of like, I've done it. This is it. Here world, take this. You're going to love it. And then you get to that reality of it's hard to get into people's minds and explain to them what's up. So Sean, what's your biggest, I guess, speed bump right now?
Education 100%. And I want to define or maybe differentiate education from sales. We are a commercial organization. We have a sales force, and their job is to sell. In our case, we hope that they do that by educating both the healthcare provider as well as the patient on what the iLet is, what it represents, and how to best use it. Mm-hmm. But given that they are a salesperson, that there's sometimes some that's looked at with a degree of skepticism, which I can appreciate. I would say that's the biggest one. Is just letting people know what the iLet is and how it represents a difference in generation, an evolution of the generation closed loop technology, right? From something where you are thinking about your insulin delivery, you are using words like bolus, basal, correction, units, carbs, to a system where you no longer think about your insulin delivery and don't use those words anymore. Mm-hmm. That's very, very different. And it takes a moment to internalize that difference and the impact on your life living with a situation like that. I'll reiterate, though, that you do still have to think about your blood sugar. That's not a requirement that we've removed, and hence our hopeful next generational shift in technology with this bi-hormonal system. But yeah, it's education.
Are you wearing your product, Sean?
I'm not at the moment. I have worn it, and I am horribly, what's the term? Anyway, I try absolutely everything and wear absolutely everything. So I just want to be honest that at the moment I'm not. And I think, the iLet's great. I love the iLet. If you have a need to fiddle with knobs, and look, I'm the worst kind of an engineer, not always the right one for you, but there you have it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, are you using a pen right now? What are you using right now?
At the moment, I'm using Loop. The way I see these things is there's your most engaged, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's your least engagement or requirement of engagement. And those probably, don't anybody quote me, look something like Loop is the most engaged, followed by like Medtronic or Tandem, and then the other one, and then Omnipod, and then us, on the far other side, taking several steps farther in terms of engagement level. And everybody's got to pick where they want to be on that.
No, listen, I think your product addresses a completely lost group of people that nobody was aiming towards, generally speaking. So I think it's terrific. I really do. Now, Paul, you and I, well, not you and I, but we do some business together. You guys buy ads on the podcast. So I work for you a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, and I know how hard it is to educate people over and over again. And man, glucagon's one of those things. Like, I speak places. I've stood in front of 400 adults with type 1 diabetes and said, hey, listen, let's take a couple of minutes to make sure we all understand how to use our rescue glucagon, and look up to see that half of them don't even know what I'm talking about. And, you know, like, so I'd like to know what that feels like from your perspective.
It's incredibly frustrating. And because, you know, I got into this because of the potential to change people's lives and save lives at the end of the day, bend the curve, so to speak. It's not just the patient. People living with this condition don't really understand how easily they can go from one situation to a really bad situation. But the healthcare professionals aren't helping them to understand either. Okay. Physicians and healthcare practitioners own a big part of this.
Yeah.
That they downplay the need for rescue glucagon because if you were a better patient, if you did this better, if you did that better, you wouldn't need that. And then on the patient side, they don't want to tell their doctor that they had to go to the emergency room because of severe low, because they're going to get the bad patient lecture.
Yeah.
Okay. And both of those are contributing to a situation where you've got 15 million people either on insulin or sulfonylureas, which are the glucose lowering agent that you should have a rescue device handy. It's very frustrating. But we continue to slug it away every single day. The new rescue products are now 80+% of the market, and Gvoke is almost 50% of that. So it's growing. It continues to grow. The market continues to grow, but we're not where we need to be. So my only answer is frustration.
No, I try to talk about it as much as I can, but you are generally met with that feeling of like, that's not going to happen to me. Yeah. And I always just think, boy, but I hope it never happens to anybody, but if it does, you do not want to be caught short. And speaking of frustration, you should have seen me sitting right here trying to say sulfonylurea while I was making your ad. So I said it about 1,000 times. I had Google saying it into my ear. I had people emailing me phonetic spellings of it. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to get this right. Anyway, I appreciate you going into that because I think you're both in a unique position. Paul, yours is obvious with glucagon, but I think with Sean's, like, I keep imagining that the people who are his target are maybe people who don't go to endos to begin with. So do you not maybe have to go to GPs and instruct them on what this is to try to, so that they have it in their head, in that moment, like, hey, you should try this. Like, I don't know anything about insulin pumps, but I heard about this. This might be right for you. Because it's simple for us to sit here, for me to make this podcast and people to listen. And I'll tell you, this podcast is up to 17 million downloads. Like, it's crazy how many people listen to this podcast, okay? But still, they're a niche of a niche of a niche. They're people who are super focused on helping themselves. And that's just not most people. For not of their own fault even. Like, there are plenty of people who get diabetes and think they're doing the right thing because the doctor told them, hey, just don't worry about it. This is good enough. And they go off on their way and they think they're doing the right thing. And we're just not reaching people at a level I'm not. I guess is my point. For all the people I'm reaching, I'm not reaching enough people. And that I find it frustrating as well, Paul. So that's why I asked.
Yeah, you just keep going. I mean, people need to understand you could be doing everything right. You could have the best pump in the world and you could be doing everything right. Something might happen.
Yeah.
For a $35 copay at the end of the day, to have a Gvoke that could save your life.
Mm-hmm. Happiest thing I do is throw away a Gvoke HypoPen. I can't tell you another way to think about it. Like, I'm lucky, I have insurance. It's covered, for a reasonable copay, like you're saying. But the greatest thing that happens is when that thing, expires, I go, ooh, we didn't need that, throw it away. And I reach right in and pull out the new one and hand it right back to her. Go, here, put this one in your pocket. Or put this in your purse, keep one in your side table. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. Anything I missed that I should have brought up? Either of you think we left anything out?
I think we primarily hit it. I'll just say that I continue to be excited. I have been excited my whole career about the evolutions we've had in the management of type 1 diabetes in the last 20 years, starting with CGM, evolving from there, maybe even going back farther to pumps. And I think that what we're doing here today is, to your point earlier, Scott, really the next generational shift in management, or at least in availability and tools for people with type 1 diabetes and maybe beyond. I'm pretty excited about that.
And Paul, I'm going to let you talk, and then I'm going to answer Sean. For you, you guys seem like, here's how I should put this. I have never set one of these interviews up so quickly in my life, which made me feel like both of you are giddy today. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think, our goal, I said at the beginning, is to participate in better management of the condition and on both ends. And we're excited to be a part of it. And, to facilitate a pump like what Sean is building, and it's important. And we like doing important things.
Sean, I'm as excited as you are to be involved in this today, because I really do believe what I said. I think that every once in a while we take a leap. And I mean, today's not the day it's happening. Obviously, there's a lot of FDA stuff and testing in between now and then. But I really do think this is day one as far as people in the public are aware of. And I do wonder what happens in 5 years when we look back and this isn't even the beginning of that level anymore. I'm super excited for people to continue to work on their algorithms, delivery systems, and everything else that helps people live, like you said, without hopefully having to think about this too much. Anyway, I appreciate you guys both coming on here and doing this. Really, it's a pleasure seeing both of you.
Thanks so much for having us, Scott. Really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.
Paul, it's good to see you again.
Ditto.
Thanks. I want to thank the Eversense CGM for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Learn more about its implantable sensor, smart transmitter, and terrific mobile application at eversensecgm.com/juicebox. Get the only implantable sensor for long-term wear. Get Eversense. Arden has been getting her diabetes supplies from US Med for 3 years. You can as well. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. My thanks to US Med for sponsoring this episode and for being longtime sponsors of the Juicebox Podcast. There are links in the show notes and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to US Med and all of the sponsors. If you or a loved one was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and you're looking for some fresh perspective, the Bold Beginnings series from the Juicebox Podcast is a terrific place to start. That series is with myself and Jenny Smith. Jenny is a CDCES, a registered dietitian, and a type 1 for over 35 years. And in the Bold Beginnings series, Jenny and I are going to answer the questions that most people have after a type 1 diabetes diagnosis. The series begins at episode 698 in your podcast player, or you can go to juiceboxpodcast.com and click on Bold Beginnings in the menu. If you're looking for community around type 1 diabetes, check out the Juicebox Podcast private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. But everybody is welcome. Type 1, Type 2, gestational, loved ones, it doesn't matter to me. If you're impacted by diabetes and you're looking for support, comfort, or community, check out Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes on Facebook. If you're not already subscribed or following in your favorite audio app, please take the time now to do that. It really helps the show. And get those automatic downloads set up so you never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast. The episode you just heard was professionally edited by Wrong Way Recording. WrongWayRecording.com.